When I came to Troas to preach the gospel of Christ, even though a door was opened for me in the Lord, my spirit was not at rest. These words of the apostle are the words with which I began my bishop's address when we met here on March 26th. I return to them as I conclude my remarks, noting the apostle's willingness with much inner struggle and grief to leave a work of evangelism to face the unpleasant demands of protecting the church and defending the faith. A dreadful choice, to be sure. Yet such a time is where some of us in the diocesan leadership have found ourselves. We return now, after this prolonged recess, to the matters before this 219th annual convention of the Diocese of South Carolina. I do not wish to keep you long this morning, though I may. This is not a bishop's address. Rather, it is an update on some of the more significant developments since we recessed 6 months ago. I have organized my words to you this morning in two overarching categories: opportunities that we have seized in fulfilling our vision, and the challenges that continue to stand before us as we seek to carry out that which God has called us to do. The Apostle Paul, after he concluded his words that his spirit was not at rest, went on to say in the next verse, "But thanks be to God, who in Christ always leads us in triumphal procession, and through us spreads the fragrance of his knowledge everywhere." At our diocesan convention in 2009, I put forward what I believed was a God-given and gospel vision that would guide us through the stormy waters facing us at that time. The vision was succinctly stated as making biblical Anglicans for a global age. There was a local, national, and international component to this vision. There still is. Slowly yet steadily, it has begun to take root in the most unlikely places. As recently as Tuesday of this week, I had the honor of being one of the presenting bishops at the installation of the Vice Chancellor of Sewanee, the University of the South, of which South Carolina was one of the founding dioceses. The new Vice Chancellor, at several points in his address to the university, echoed our diocesan vision. Dr. John McCardle noted such things as biblical Anglicans and global Anglicanism. It resounded as he spoke about his hope and the future of this noble university and its School of Theology. So too with other events at which I have attended representing this great diocese of South Carolina since we recessed in 2009 convention in March. Communion partners and global Anglicanism. I was grateful to be invited with Bishop Howe, John Howe of the Diocese of Central Florida, to represent the communion partner bishops at the Global South to South encounter in Singapore this past May. In the communique from this important gathering, these dioceses with communion partner bishops were singled out among all the dioceses in the Episcopal Church as bishops and dioceses with whom these provinces were willing to remain in fellowship and communion. Later this summer at the Kappa gathering in Entebbe, Uganda, once again the communion partner bishops were again cited as the only ones within the Episcopal Church with whom these 13 provinces could continue to work and partner without reservation. Though I might also add, the Kappa province has also referenced favorably the Anglican Church in North America. The communion partner bishops and rectors will meet later this fall in Orlando, and our Anglican Communion Development Committee has been asked to give a presentation on our formative relationships and strategies within the emerging Anglicanism in the 21st century. Bishop Michael Nazarale, visiting bishop in South Carolina for Anglican Communion Development. In May of this year, the Reverend Dr. Kendall Harmon and I traveled to Nashotah House to meet with the Right Reverend Michael Nazarale, retired Bishop of Rochester, England, and one of the most respected figures in the Anglican Communion. We discussed the possibility of forming a relationship between him and the Diocese of South Carolina. Then in September, the Reverend Jeff Miller and I met with Bishop Michael Nazarale in Washington, D.C. to clarify the details of such a relationship. It is my great pleasure to announce at this reconvened annual convention that he has agreed to be visiting bishop in South Carolina for Anglican Communion relationships. Thus, along with periodic visits here in the diocese for teaching and for relational support, he will represent this diocese on his travels around the world. This creative and vital relationship will give us further opportunities to strengthen existing and form new and abiding missional relationships with others in the emerging Anglicanism in the 21st century. It gives legs to our vision. Less than a week ago, I returned from Cairo, Egypt, where I had been invited by Bishop Munir Anis, Primate of Jerusalem and the Middle East, to attend an extended executive council meeting of his diocese and to lead a retreat for the clergy of the Diocese of Egypt, the Horn of Africa, and North Africa. I was joined in this mission by my wife Allison, who addressed the clergy spouses, and by the Reverend Mike Clarkson, rector of Our Savior John's Island, and Chris Royer, associate at the Cross in Bluffton. It was a truly exciting time of ministry in word and spirit as we initiated a partnership between the Diocese of Egypt, North Africa, and the Horn of Africa, and the Diocese of South Carolina. Bishop Munir is scheduled to be in Charleston as a speaker at the upcoming Mere Anglicanism Conference in January of 2011. At that time, we will look for an opportunity to celebrate this new partnership. Ireland and the Diocese of Kilmore, Elphin, and Ardagh. Also this week, I received an email from Bishop Ken Clark of Kilmore, Elphin, and Ardagh in Ireland. This past summer, we established an important relationship there as well. Our youth coordinator, David Wright, led a group of high school youth, young Christian leaders, to Ireland for a mission trip. So also the Reverend Chuck Owens, rector of the Cross Bluffton, also spent some time in Bishop Clark's diocese, leading a clergy day, which has had a transforming effect for many. Bishop Clark referenced both of these unrelated missions in his bishop's address this past Saturday during his recent synod or annual diocesan convention. Let me share with you just two of his recent comments. The first from his bishop's address to his diocese. This summer, we hosted a group of young people from the Diocese of South Carolina. The trip went very well, and next year a team of young people will go to South Carolina. It is heartening to see the deepening links with South Carolina. The Bishop of South Carolina, Mark Lawrence, has a passion for gospel mission. This is a difficult time for him and his diocese. We assure him and the people of the diocese of our prayers and continued full support. We thank God for you, and we look forward to a growing relationship in mission and ministry. The second is from an email Bishop Clark sent to Father Owens. Brother, I want to thank you again for your visit to us. You had a real Barnabas ministry, and you have no idea how blessed we were by both of you. That is, his wife, Becky, joined him. Many times since then, I've quoted you. You featured again in my diocesan synod address a few days ago, and I thought it might be good for you to see that your ministry to the Irish continues. How encouraging it is for me to know how quickly the bonds of affection are growing between our two dioceses and their people. The provinces of Tanzania and Burundi, and the Diocese of Dominican Republic. So too, there has been a strengthening of our relationship with the province of Tanzania through our Archbishop Valentino Makiwa, through his recent visit here in South Carolina, through the work of the Anglican Communion Development Committee, and through teaching missions there by the Reverend Greg Crons, rector of St. Luke's Hilton Head. Time prevents me from referencing the many trips to the Dominican Republic that parishes from this diocese have made, and the participation of others in the Dominican Development Group. So too in Burundi, many from the parishes of this diocese have gone out and have been blessed as they have been a blessing. We are, in fact, truly about the work of making biblical Anglicans for a global age, both here and abroad. Making biblical Anglicans at home. Along with these endeavors in the larger Anglican communion, we have sought to engage in vigorous and creative ways with organizations within the Episcopal Church, witnessing to what we believe is a right understanding of our faith and polity. Working cooperatively with various groups, from communion partners to such groups as the Union of Black Episcopalians. May I pause here for a moment to ask those of you who were a part of that gathering here in June of hosting the Union of Black Episcopalians from around this country in the Episcopal Church to please stand. The annual renewal conference at Kanuga was in many ways led by many people from this Diocese of South Carolina and ministered to Episcopalians from all over the southeast, if not further afield. Some 400, I believe, Episcopalians attended that week-long conference. Then next month, the National Cursillo Gathering will meet in Myrtle Beach, South Carolina, hosted by our diocese and the Upper Diocese of South Carolina. And again, people from this diocese will work with others within the Episcopal Church to further God's mission in the world. Frankly, we have the heartfelt support of vast numbers of Anglicans and Episcopalians around the world. Thus, the voices coming from outside the diocese, as well as from inside the diocese, that suggest we are courting separatism or an inappropriate autonomy rings rather hollow when one considers what we are about here in this diocese. We are clearly connected in significant ways across the worldwide Anglican communion. We are seeking to work collegially where we can with those within the Episcopal Church and with others in the larger Anglican scene in North America. Certainly we have challenged and will continue to challenge a tendency to revive the core doctrines of our church and to reshape the polity of the Episcopal Church through an inappropriate extension of power. What a great time to be alive and to be about the work of the gospel of Jesus Christ. Challenges to fulfilling our vision. But make no mistake, there are challenges that await us at every turn. As you know, we recessed in March with the unconstitutional incursions of the presiding bishop before us. We recessed rather than adjourn the convention because we did not know what the response would be to our demands that she follow the Constitution of the Episcopal Church. Had she removed the attorney she had retained without the authorization of this church's polity, we may have been able to adjourn this convention with an announcement by the chair. But that has not been the case. The request of this convention made of her to desist her unauthorized incursion has met with a stony silence. Perhaps it is for the better. For subsequently, the Standing Committee and I engaged in a thorough study of the revisions of the Title IV canons. These canons are often referred to as the disciplinary canons of the Church's clergy. These revisions were approved at General Convention in 2009 and are scheduled to go into effect on July 1st of 2011. Quite to our surprise, upon a thorough study and analysis, we discovered that these revisions give a sweeping authority to diocesan bishops, undermine the guarantee of due process for all the clergy, and gives unconstitutional authority to the presiding bishop to intrude into a diocese without the Standing Committee's authority, thereby bringing the possibility of a dramatic change in the way the Episcopal Church has functioned over the last 200 years. As you know, these concerns have been aired and discussed at deanery meetings during September, therein providing sufficient time to understand the matters that lie before this body today. These resolutions are not, as some have suggested, intended to remove this diocese from the Episcopal Church. On the contrary, they are proposed for the purpose of enabling this Diocese of South Carolina to continue to rightly engage to conform to the doctrine, discipline, and worship of the Episcopal Church, rightly understood, and the doctrine, discipline, and worship of Christ, as this church has received them, and to be able to stand as a serious minority voice in this church. Indeed, it is so we can continue to support and defend the Constitution and the Episcopal Church that this diocese helped to establish over 200 years ago, that the Standing Committee has put forward these resolutions. Why not downplay the difficulties? As I have said repeatedly in recent weeks at the various deanery gatherings, some within the diocese would desire us to quit battling, to go with the flow, to play down the conflicts that so trouble many of us about the Episcopal Church's confirmed trajectory, to celebrate the good, and certainly I can cite some encouraging signs around the Episcopal Church. In fact, I have done so already in these remarks. But allow me to reference just briefly another. The presiding bishop has written recently in support of Archbishop Daniel Ding Bull of the Episcopal Church of the Sudan. He met just this week with an ecumenical body before the United Nations officials and the Secretary General, Ban Ki-moon. Since I have just spoken with the suffragan bishop of Egypt, the Right Reverend Andrew Proud, who oversees the Horn of Africa, which includes Ethiopia, Eritrea, and Somalia, on behalf of Bishop Munir, I am sensitive to the issues the Sudanese face. I'm glad that the presiding bishop has spoken in support of the leaders of the Sudan in their struggles with aggressive, radicalized Islam. But even this support of our Episcopal brethren in the Sudanese church is compromised, because the positions espoused by a majority of our leaders in the Episcopal Church cause ever-increasing difficulties for these very Anglicans she is speaking out on behalf of. Thus, the complexities of our present crisis. Yet, nevertheless, we can appreciate her lending her voice to these concerns. Nevertheless, while we can be grateful for the positive things within our church, to fail to address the real dangers that lie before us and that would compromise or endanger our ability to pursue our vision for the gospel, both at home and abroad, would be a failure to face reality as it is, and consequently would be a failure of leadership. The sad truth is that our theological commitments are seen by more than a few of the present leadership in this church as the enemy. We hold a position that needs to be purged or eliminated, or at best contained or marginalized in an ecclesiastical ghetto. There are such things in this world as mutually exclusive understandings of the Christian faith. There are such things as a mutually exclusive understanding of the church's mission, where coexistence would seem unlikely, if not impossible. Why not just leave? Along with the voices that just say, be quiet and get along, there are others who say, Bishop, why don't you just leave? Depart with or without your buildings. For these voices, I say, we still have a God-given vocation within this worldwide struggle. Not unlike a battalion in a military campaign, which is ordered to hold a pass or a position against overwhelming odds. So we are called to resist what many of us believe as a self-destructive trajectory within the Episcopal Church, and to resist until it is no longer possible, and at the same time to help shape the emerging Anglicanism in the 21st century, which is increasingly relational and less institutional. In conclusion, the question stands before this reconvened House is whether the passing of these resolutions is the best way to do this. I believe at present they are. But each of us must vote his or her conscience while respecting the conscience of others. Then let us get back to the joyful work of proclaiming the good news of Jesus Christ to a world in need of His saving sacrifice on the cross and its transforming message. My prayer is that we do this and will continue to recognize that we are in a season not unlike the days of Nehemiah, when men and women were called to have a sword in one hand and a trowel in the other, or to put it in New Testament terms, to guard the faith and to proclaim the gospel. The gravity of the moment that is before us. Before I conclude these remarks, I must inform you of one further development that has happened this week. One of the tasks of leadership is to make available, as best as one is able, not only the opportunities but also the challenges, and with both, the risks involved. I have spoken of many of the opportunities we have seized in just this last 6 months. I turn now to a real challenge and a grievous risk. On Tuesday evening of this week, as Allison and I were driving home from Swanee, I received a phone call from a fellow bishop. He said that he and 5 other bishops had received an email earlier that evening from the presiding bishop. She was encouraging each of them to speak with me, as the apparent focus of this diocesan gathering does not bode well for Mark's status as a bishop who has sworn to uphold the doctrine, discipline, and worship of this church. Perhaps she has forgotten it has not boded well for my status as a bishop since the first election. But frankly, for me, it has never been about my status. Since that September morning in 2006, when Bishop Salmon called me while I sat in a Board of Examining Chaplains meeting in Fresno, California, to tell me I had been elected as the 14th Bishop of South Carolina, it has been unswervingly about this diocese. It remains that to this day. Well, upon hearing of her email to these bishops, I wrote directly to the presiding bishop on Wednesday morning, addressing many of my concerns and reminding her of the concerns of this convention. that she had been informed by certified mail of the resolution which expressed our expectation that she remove the attorney unconstitutionally retained within this diocese. I then wrote that after 6 months, we had still not heard from her. While her email in response failed once again to address this concern, she did write of her fear about the havoc that she believes is likely to ensue if I keep on my present course. What she fails to address, or I suppose to understand, is the havoc that is likely to ensue if we depart from our present course. Thus, while there is no absence of opportunities that come to us, they come replete with a church filled with challenges. Several of those bishops who received the email have called me or sent me emails since that email was sent to them. More than a few of them said, "Mark, we need your voice in the House of Bishops. We need the voice of South Carolina." I said, "This is my voice. You need to understand, this is my voice." So the question is there place for a vigorously stated minority opinion in this church? I believe it is also the voice of many of the people here in this Diocese of South Carolina. If you want our voice, then we're giving it to you. Thus, the opportunities come in a church filled with challenge. There's no risk-free way forward for us. I leave you this morning with words of a preacher from another era who wrote, "If it be a man's ambition to avoid the troubles of life, the recipe is perfectly simple. Let him shed his ambitions in every direction. Let him cut the wings of every soaring purpose, and let him assiduously cultivate a little life with the fewest correspondences and relationships. By this means a whole continent of afflictions will be escaped and remain unknown." And I might dare to add one final thought to this preacher's words, that along with a whole continent of afflictions that will be escaped and remain unknown, there will be an entire universe of opportunities that will be lost and will go unfulfilled. You must weigh, my brothers and sisters, you must weigh these opportunities and challenges along with their risks. You must weigh them on the scale of your heart. It is indeed a great time to be alive, but it is also a time that tries men's souls. But as for me and my house, we will serve the Lord.